I was called Jake the Joke. The golden child accused me of showing off, and after graduating from LSE, I became their ATM. Enough. And then When you grow up feeling like you're invisible, you learn to disappear in other ways too. As a kid, I was always good at making myself small, blending into the background so I wouldn't draw too much attention, especially at home. My name is Jake Mitchell, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the outsider in my own family. It wasn't just the usual sibling rivalry. This was deeper, more insidious. While my older sister, Megan, was the golden child, and my younger brother, Daniel, was the athlete who could do no wrong, I was just there. The in-between. At least, that's how it felt most of the time. I have so many memories of feeling out of place, like I didn't belong. My dad, Paul Mitchell, always made it clear that Megan was the one destined for greatness. He loved to brag about how smart and driven she was, how she was going to make something of herself. She's going to be the one who takes care of us when we're old, he used to say, laughing, as if it was some kind of joke. And then there was Daniel, the family's star athlete, always winning trophies and medals. Dad was at every one of his games, front row, cheering louder than anyone else. But when it came to me, there was silence. It's not that my parents didn't care about me at all. It was more like they didn't see me. Or if they did, they only saw my shortcomings. I wasn't Megan, the straight-A student destined for Ivy League success, and I wasn't Daniel, the sports prodigy. I was the quiet one, the kid who preferred reading in his room to playing outside, who didn't fit the mold of what they expected. Lynn, my mom, was no better. She had a way of making me feel like a burden without ever saying it directly. Whenever I tried to share something with her, whether it was an accomplishment from school or something I was excited about, she would nod distractedly, her mind clearly elsewhere. Once, I told her I'd won a local writing contest. I was so proud of myself, thinking maybe, finally, this would be the thing that made her see me. "That's nice, Jake," she said, barely glancing up from her laptop. "But you know, Megan's working on her senior thesis. That's going to be published soon. Isn't that amazing?" I nodded, the lump in my throat growing bigger. I wasn't sure what I expected anymore, but I kept hoping something would change. Then there was the bullying. School was no escape from the isolation I felt at home. In fact, it was worse. From elementary school all the way through high school, I was a prime target for bullies. I wasn't big or tough, and I wasn't good at sports like Daniel, which put a target on my back. Kids like Ryan Lewis and his gang made it their mission to make my life miserable. I'll never forget the day in 7th grade when Ryan and his buddies cornered me in the schoolyard. I'd been walking home, head down, trying to avoid any attention. But that's the thing about bullies. They can sense when you're trying to hide. It's like they have a radar for weakness. "Hey, Jake the Joke," Ryan called out. I didn't stop walking, hoping they'd get bored and leave me alone, but that was a mistake. The next thing I knew, I was shoved hard from behind. I stumbled, dropping my books, and before I could even react, Ryan was in front of me, grinning. "What's wrong, Joke? Too scared to fight back?" His friends laughed, circling me like a pack of wolves. I tried to say something, anything, but my throat was dry, and the words wouldn't come. Before I knew it, Ryan shoved me again, this time harder. I hit the ground, and they laughed even louder. I remember lying there, the taste of dirt in my mouth, wondering why no one was coming to help. I could handle the beatings, the taunts. What hurt more was knowing that I didn't have anyone to turn to. Not my parents, not my siblings. At home, I couldn't tell them what was happening at school. Megan was always too busy with her friends or her academic achievements to care. Daniel, the golden boy, was too wrapped up in his own world of sports to notice. And my parents? They were too busy praising Megan and Daniel to even realize I was struggling. There was one person who had my back, though. Ethan Brooks Starr. Ethan had been my best friend since 2nd grade. One of the few people who didn't care that I wasn't popular or athletic. He'd stick up for me when Ryan and his crew came after me, and even though we both got beaten up a few times because of it, Ethan never abandoned me. He made me feel like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't completely invisible. I remember one time after school, when Ethan and I were sitting on the swings at the park, nursing our bruises after another run-in with Ryan. "You can't let them get to you, Jake," Ethan said, swinging lazily, His voice calm despite the busted lip he was sporting. I shrugged. It's not just them, you know? It's my whole family. I feel like I'm nothing to them. Megan and Daniel can do no wrong, and I'm just there. Ethan stopped swinging and looked at me seriously. You're not nothing. You're smart, Jake. You're going to do something great someday. And when you do, they're going to regret not seeing it. I wanted to believe him, but it was hard. How could I, when everything around me screamed the opposite? Still, Ethan's words stuck with me, becoming a small flame in the darkness I was living in. As I got older, that flame turned into something more. Determination. I decided that if my parents couldn't see my worth, I'd have to prove it to them. I focused on school, studying harder than ever, working to get into a good college so I could finally leave home and become someone on my own terms. If my parents wouldn't acknowledge me for who I was, I'd make sure they'd have no choice but to see me when I succeeded. I remember the day I got my acceptance letter to New York University. It was the moment I'd been waiting for. I ran downstairs, the letter clutched in my hand, excitement bubbling up in my chest. This was it, the moment they'd finally notice me. Mom, Dad, I got into NYU, I announced, breathless with excitement. I was waiting for the praise, the recognition, the validation I'd been craving for years. Dad looked up from his newspaper, raising an eyebrow. NYU? Isn't that expensive? My heart sank a little, but I pressed on. Yeah, but I got a scholarship that'll cover most of it. Mom glanced at me briefly before turning back to the TV. Well, that's nice, Jake. But you know Megan got into Stanford, right? That's going to be tough to top. I stood there, stunned. My acceptance letter suddenly feeling like a worthless piece of paper in my hand. They didn't care. I'd worked my ass off for years, and they didn't care. It was like nothing I did would ever be enough. Megan was always going to be the star, and Daniel would always be the perfect son, and I'd just be there. That was the moment I realized that no matter how hard I tried, no matter what I achieved, I was never going to be enough for them. But that didn't mean I couldn't be enough for myself. Leaving home for college was the best decision I ever made. For the first time, I was free from the suffocating weight of my family's indifference. NYU was everything I'd hoped for and more. I made new friends, found my passion for finance, and finally started to feel like I was building a future for myself. A future where I could succeed on my own terms, without needing my parents' approval. Still, a part of me couldn't shake the hope that someday they'd see what I'd become and realize how wrong they'd been. I wanted to believe that if I became successful enough, if I made enough money, they'd finally be proud of me. So, I threw myself into my studies and later, into my career. I landed an internship at a top investment firm in New York, and that set me on the path to a successful career in finance. But no matter how much success I achieved, no matter how much money I made, that longing for their approval stayed with me, like a shadow I couldn't shake. And that's what kept me tied to them, even as I grew older and more independent. After years of being invisible to my family, leaving home for college felt like breaking out of a prison I hadn't even known I was locked in. New York University was my ticket to a life I could control, a place where I could finally shed the weight of my parents' indifference. For the first time in my life, I wasn't constantly in Megan's shadow or being compared to Daniel. I was just Jake, and that was enough. College was a breath of fresh air. I threw myself into my studies, determined to excel. I made new friends, found a tight-knit group of people who saw me for who I was, not for who they wanted me to be, and I flourished in the finance program. I discovered I had a knack for numbers and analysis, and for the first time, I started to feel like maybe I was worth something after all. But even as I found my place at NYU, the invisible weight of my family's expectations lingered in the back of my mind. No matter how far I went, how much I achieved, there was still this gnawing need to prove myself to my parents. They were barely present in my life during those college years. We rarely spoke, and when we did, the conversations were short, almost transactional. Dad would ask about grades, as if that were the only part of my life that mattered, and Mom would mention Megan's or Daniel's latest accomplishments, comparing them to whatever minor success I'd achieved. Despite the distance, I still clung to the hope that once I became successful enough, they would finally acknowledge me. I thought that if I worked hard enough, earned enough, and climbed high enough, They would see me as more than just the extra kid, the one who wasn't enough. After graduation, I landed a job at a top-tier investment firm in New York City, Valiant Capital Star. The offer came with an impressive salary, and I knew that this was my chance to start building a life that I could be proud of. I imagined myself walking into my parents' house one day, driving a sleek car, wearing an expensive suit, and seeing the look of surprise and, finally, pride in their eyes. I daydream about those moments, thinking that wealth and success would be the key to unlocking their approval. I worked long hours, often staying late at the office, pushing myself to exceed every expectation. My bosses noticed, and I quickly moved up the ranks. But even as my professional life took off, my relationship with my family remained distant. They never asked about my job, my life, or how I was doing. The only time I heard from them was when something was going wrong back home. It started with small requests. One day, I got a call from my mom, Lynn, asking if I could help out with some medical bills. She sounded stressed, telling me about how her insurance wasn't covering some procedures and how money was tight. I hesitated at first, not because I didn't want to help, but because it was the first time in years that she had called me about anything other than Megan or Daniel. It felt strange, like the only reason she was reaching out was because she needed something. But I did it. I sent her money to cover the bills. It wasn't a huge amount, and I figured that if it helped her, maybe she'd start to see me differently. Maybe she'd appreciate that I could step up for the family. After all, wasn't that what I'd been trying to prove all along? That I could be just as important, just as reliable as Megan or Daniel. After that, the requests came more frequently. Dad called next, asking if I could help with the mortgage. He explained how some unexpected expenses had come up and how they were behind on payments. "It would really help out, Jake," he said, his voice strained. "You know things haven't been easy since Megan moved out and Daniel's starting his own business. So he's got his own problems to deal with." I wasn't sure if it was the guilt or the lingering desire to be accepted, but I agreed. I transferred money to their account that night, feeling both a sense of duty and a growing resentment that they were only reaching out when they needed something from me. At first, it was manageable. I had a good job, and I didn't mind helping out when I could. But as the months turned into years, the requests became more frequent, more urgent. There was always some new crisis, a medical emergency, car repairs, home repairs, Daniel's failed business venture. Each time, I sent the money, hoping that maybe this time they'd acknowledge what I was doing for them. But they never did. No matter how much I gave, no matter how much I sacrificed, it was never enough. My parents never once thanked me for the financial support I was providing. They never acknowledged that I was essentially keeping their lives afloat while they continued to dote on Megan and Daniel. Every time I visited home, which was rare, I saw how they fawned over my siblings, talking about their successes and how proud they were of them. Meanwhile, my contributions went unnoticed. The worst part was that it wasn't just about the money. I wasn't sending them checks because I wanted their gratitude. I was doing it because I still believed, somewhere deep down, that if I could just do enough for them, they'd finally see me. They'd finally be proud of me. But as the years passed, the resentment grew. I was working long hours, sacrificing my own happiness and personal life, just to keep their lives comfortable. I missed out on vacations, relationships, and opportunities because I was constantly trying to meet their needs. And they didn't even care. I'll never forget the time I called home to tell them about a big promotion I'd gotten at work. I had been named a senior associate at Valiant Capital, a position that came with a huge salary bump and more responsibility. I was excited, thinking that maybe this would be the thing that finally made them proud. "Hey, Mom, I got promoted," I said, hoping for some kind of reaction. "Oh, that's great, Jake," she said, sounding distracted. "But listen, I was just talking to Megan, and did you know she's working on this big project at her job? They're thinking of promoting her to manager soon. Isn't that amazing?" I felt the familiar sting of disappointment, but I tried to brush it off. "Yeah, that's great for Megan. But, about my promotion. Oh, and Daniel just bought a new car. Can you believe it? He's doing so well with his business now." I stopped trying after that. I realized that no matter how much I achieved, no matter how much I helped them, I was always going to be the extra kid, the one who didn't matter. Still, I kept sending money. I kept supporting them because I didn't know how to stop. Even as my resentment grew, I couldn't shake the sense of obligation, the feeling that I owed them something, even though they had never given me what I needed in return. Every time I tried to step back, I'd get another call from mom or dad, telling me about the latest financial crisis, asking if I could help out just this once. It wasn't just the money. It was the emotional toll. I was constantly stressed, always worrying about the next call, the next request. I felt like I was drowning in their problems, while they lived their lives without a second thought for me. They were living comfortably because of me, and yet I was the one who felt like a freeloader, like I didn't deserve any recognition or thanks for what I was doing. And the worst part? I didn't tell anyone. Not Ethan, not my colleagues, not my therapist. I was ashamed that I kept letting myself be used, ashamed that I still craved their approval after all these years. One evening, I found myself sitting in my apartment, staring at my bank account. I had just sent another large sum of money to my parents for some medical expenses, and I was calculating how much I'd given them over the years. The total shocked me. Tens of thousands of dollars. I had spent so much of my hard-earned money on them, and yet they still treated me like I didn't exist. I couldn't keep doing this. I couldn't keep sacrificing my own happiness for a family that didn't care about me. But even as I thought about cutting them off, a wave of guilt washed over me. Could I really do that? Could I walk away from my family, knowing they might struggle without my help? I didn't have an answer, but something had to change. I couldn't keep living like this, constantly chasing the approval of people who would never give it to me. And deep down, I knew it wasn't just about the money. It was about something much bigger. It was about learning to let go of the hope that they would ever see me the way I wanted them to. It was about realizing that I couldn't keep sacrificing myself for people who didn't care. But at that moment, I wasn't ready to make that decision. So I kept going, sending the money, hoping that one day, things would change. I knew something had to give. For years, I had shouldered my family's financial burdens without so much as a thank you. Every time the phone rang, I felt a knot form in my stomach, dreading the next request. I had sacrificed vacations, relationships, and even my own happiness to keep them afloat. But no matter how much I gave, it was never enough. The breaking point came one evening when I received a call from Megan. It had been a few weeks since I'd last heard from anyone in the family, and I foolishly thought maybe things had settled down. I was even beginning to enjoy the silence. But the peace didn't last long. "Hey, Jake," Megan started, her tone casual, like we were still close siblings and she hadn't spent years ignoring me unless she needed something. "I was talking to Mom and Dad earlier, and they mentioned the house needs some repairs. You think you could send some money? The roof is leaking pretty badly, and they're swamped with bills." I felt the familiar wave of resentment rise in my chest. "What about Daniel?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Oh, Daniel's business is just starting to pick up. He's investing all his earnings back into it," she said, brushing it off like it was no big deal. I sighed, trying to keep my frustration in check. "I've been sending them money for years, Megan. When is it going to be enough?" She paused, clearly taken aback by my tone. "Look, I know you've helped a lot, but they need you. You're the one with the stable job, right? It's not like you're struggling." It was like she had slapped me. I could feel the anger bubbling beneath the surface, the weight of years of being overlooked, ignored, and used pressing down on me. I had always been the one with the stable job, the one who never asked for anything in return, the one they all leaned on while pretending I didn't exist. And here was Megan, acting like I had an endless supply of money and no right to complain. "I can't keep doing this," I said, my voice low but firm. "You and Daniel never help. I've given them thousands of dollars, Megan. I've paid for their mortgage, their medical bills, their car repairs, and now they want more. I can't be the only one holding this family together." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line before Megan spoke again, this time with a sharper edge in her voice. "Well, it's not like you're doing it out of the goodness of your heart, Jake. You're just trying to show off. You're trying to make up for the fact that you don't visit, that you don't even care about us." I was stunned. Show off? How could she say that? I had been breaking my back for years, trying to earn their approval, trying to prove that I cared, that I wasn't the freeloader they thought I was. And now she was accusing me of trying to show off? "Megan, That's not true, and you know it. I snapped, my anger finally boiling over. I've been the only one helping them. You and Daniel haven't lifted a finger. She scoffed. Please, don't act like a martyr. You're just throwing money at them because it's easier than actually being part of this family. Before I could respond, the line went dead. Megan had hung up on me. I stared at my phone, seething with frustration. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to make them understand how much I had done for them, how much I had sacrificed. And then it hit me. Asterisk, they didn't care, star. They didn't care about the money I'd sent, the long hours I worked, or the vacations I skipped. In their eyes, I was still the outsider. No matter what I did, I would always be the extra kid, the one who wasn't as smart as Megan or as athletic as Daniel, the one who didn't fit. But the worst part was realizing that I had let them do this to me. I had let them take advantage of me for years because I was too desperate for their approval. I thought if I kept giving, kept sacrificing, they'd finally see me. But they never would. Later that evening, still fuming from the conversation with Megan, I went to grab my phone and saw a new voicemail notification. I hesitated for a moment, knowing full well it was from my parents. Sure enough, the voicemail was from my mom. Her voice was sharp and accusatory, far from the warm, maternal tone I craved as a child. Jake, we need to talk. Megan told us about your little outburst earlier, and frankly, I'm disappointed. You've been so helpful to us, but now you're acting like you're too good for this family. I don't know what's gotten into you, but we need that money for the house repairs. It's your responsibility to. Don't be selfish. Selfish, that word echoed in my head long after the voicemail ended. Selfish? I had been the one supporting them all these years, and now they had the nerve to call me selfish? That was the moment everything inside me snapped. I couldn't keep living like this, constantly sacrificing my well-being for people who couldn't even muster an ounce of gratitude. I had spent my entire life being their emotional and financial crutch, hoping that one day they'd recognize what I had done for them. But they never would. It wasn't in their nature. I sat there for what felt like hours, thinking about all the years I'd wasted trying to win their approval, all the sleepless nights I'd spent working overtime, all the relationships I'd neglected because I was too focused on keeping my family happy. And for what? To be called a freeloader by Megan? To be labeled selfish by my own mother? That night, I made the decision to cut them off. Completely. No more money. No more phone calls. No more guilt. I wasn't going to be their lifeline anymore, and I wasn't going to keep sacrificing my happiness for people who didn't care about me. I blocked their numbers, deleted their contacts from my phone, and turned off all notifications from any family-related social media groups. It felt strange, almost surreal, but also liberating. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. The next few days were quiet. Too quiet, almost. I kept expecting a barrage of angry texts or calls from some unknown number, but they never came. It was as if my family didn't even notice that I had disappeared from their lives. At first, the silence was unsettling. I was so used to being needed, to being the one who solved all their problems, that I didn't know what to do with the absence of their demands. But as the days turned into weeks, I began to feel something I hadn't felt in years: freedom. For the first time, I started focusing on myself. I took time off work, booked a solo trip to Europe, and began reconnecting with old friends I had lost touch with during my years of overwork. I even started seeing a therapist to work through the complicated emotions that had built up over the years. During one of those sessions, my therapist asked me a simple question. Why did you keep giving to them when you knew they'd never give back? I didn't have an answer. At least, not right away. But over time, I realized that it wasn't just about wanting their approval. It was about the guilt. I had spent so many years feeling like a burden, feeling like I wasn't good enough, that I believed I owed them something. I thought if I just kept giving, it would make up for all the ways I felt like I'd failed them. But the truth was, I hadn't failed. They had. They had failed to see me. They had failed to appreciate me. And they had failed to love me for who I was, not for what I could provide. As the weeks went by, I found myself growing stronger, more confident. I no longer felt like the invisible child, the forgotten sibling, the one who was never enough. I was enough, not for them, but for me. And that was all that mattered. I hadn't spoken to my family in over 2 months when I received a text from a number I didn't recognize. It was Daniel. "Hey, Jake. I know things have been weird lately, but we really need you right now. The house repairs are getting worse, and Mom and Dad are struggling. Please call." I stared at the text for a long time before deleting it. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. For the first time in my life, I knew that I didn't owe them anything. I'd lost count of how many times they had called. Mom asking for help with medical bills, Dad talking about house repairs, and then Megan or Daniel chiming in whenever they needed me to cover another emergency. It seemed like every few months there was some new crisis, and I was expected to fix it. But lately, I'd been wondering, what if it wasn't real? What if I was just pouring money into a black hole, one that I would never fill? After the last call from Mom, when she once again asked for help with the latest bills, something inside me broke. There were no doubts left. I was being used. For years, I had tried to convince myself that I was helping, that my family needed me. But every new request only deepened the bitterness. I sat in my office, staring at the monitor, and one thought kept spinning in my mind. What if I'm just another source of money for them, like an ATM? I couldn't ignore it anymore. Exhaustion washed over me in waves, but the doubts were stronger. I ran my hand across my face, feeling the tension gripping my temples. Enough. I had to find out the truth, asterisk. I picked up the phone and dialed the number that my colleague had given me, a financial auditor named Sarah. "Hi, this is Jake Mitchell," I said, my voice cracking slightly from fatigue. "I need to meet with you for a financial audit. I've been sending money to my family for years, and I want a detailed review of where it's been going. Is it possible to meet tomorrow?" There was a pause on the other end of the line before Sarah responded. "Yes, we can meet tomorrow. I'll need all your records and any information you have on the transactions. We'll take it from there." I thanked her and hung up the phone, my mind racing. I had always tried to push away the doubts, telling myself that I was just being paranoid. But now, those doubts were louder than ever. If my parents had been lying to me all these years, I didn't even know what I'd do. The next day, I found myself sitting across from Sarah in her office. She was a serious woman, the kind who didn't waste time with pleasantries. I handed her a stack of documents, bank statements, transaction histories, anything that could help her track where the money had gone. "I want to know everything," I told her. "I was told the money was for medical expenses, house repairs, things like that. But I have this nagging feeling that it wasn't." Sarah nodded, flipping through the papers. "I understand. We'll go through every transaction and investigate any unusual activity. Some of this might take a few days, depending on the details." "Thank you," I said, my voice tight. I need to know what's been happening." I left her office feeling a strange mix of anxiety and relief. Finally, I was going to get answers. But I couldn't shake the fear that those answers would be worse than I imagined. 3 days later, my phone rang. It was Sarah. "Jake, I need you to come to my office as soon as you can. We've found something serious." My heart dropped. I had expected her to find something, but the urgency in her voice sent a cold chill down my spine. I rushed to her office, my mind spinning with possibilities. By the time I arrived, my stomach was in knots. When I sat down, Sarah didn't waste any time. She opened a file and pushed it toward me. "The majority of the money you've been sending wasn't for medical expenses or house repairs," she said. "It was being funneled into several businesses connected to your brother, Daniel." I stared at her, confused. "Daniel? What businesses? I thought his company failed years ago." Sarah sighed. "These companies are small and look legitimate on the surface. But when we dug deeper, we found that they're tied to illegal gambling operations. Your brother has been involved in underground gambling, and from what we can tell, he racked up significant debts. The money you've been sending has been used to cover those debts." I felt like the room was spinning. Gambling? Daniel's been gambling this whole time? I had no idea. But the worst was yet to come. Sarah leaned forward, her expression grave. "Your parents knew, Jake. They knew about Daniel's debts, and they used your money to bail him out. They've been hiding this from you for years." Her words hit me like a sledgehammer. My parents, my own parents, had been lying to me, using me to protect Daniel from his own mistakes. All those times they called, asking for help with medical bills or house repairs, it had all been a lie. Every single dollar I'd sent had gone toward covering up Daniel's gambling addiction. I could barely breathe. They knew. I whispered. They knew. And they still let me keep sending money? Sarah nodded sympathetically. I'm sorry, Jake. I know this is a lot to take in, but the records are clear. Your money was used to pay off Daniel's gambling debts, and your parents were complicit in it. I sat there in stunned silence, my mind racing. I had sacrificed everything for them. My time, my money, my happiness. And they had used me like I was nothing more than an ATM. They hadn't cared about me. Not really. They just needed my money to keep Daniel out of trouble. I thanked Sarah and left her office in a daze, my body numb. When I got back to my apartment, I collapsed on the couch, replaying the last few years in my head. Every phone call, every request for money, it had all been part of their plan. They had known what they were doing the whole time. I didn't know how long I sat there, staring at nothing, before my phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Megan. Asterisk, Jake. You need to talk to Mom and Dad right away. We can explain everything. Asterisk. I felt a surge of anger as I read her words. Explain everything. What could they possibly say to justify what they'd done? My hands were shaking as I dialed my mother's number. She picked up after a few rings, her voice nervous. Jake, we didn't want you to find out like this, but it was all for Daniel. He was in trouble, and we couldn't let him go to jail. I couldn't hold back anymore. You used me, I shouted. All these years, I thought I was helping you, but you were lying. I was financing Daniel's criminal debts. Did you think that was okay? That I wouldn't find out? Jake, please, we were just trying to protect him, she pleaded, her voice shaking. You wouldn't understand. Understand? I cut her off, my voice trembling with rage. You never wanted me to understand anything. You treated me like a bank. You never cared about me. You just cared about what I could give you. There was silence on the other end of the line, and I knew she had no defense. There was nothing she could say to make this right. I'm done, I said quietly. Don't call me anymore. I won't be your financial slave. You can deal with Daniel's mess on your own. Before she could respond, I hung up and threw my phone across the room. My entire body was trembling. The anger, the betrayal, it was too much. I had trusted them. I had believed that maybe, if I kept helping, they would see me, appreciate me. But I had been nothing more than a means to an end. I sat there for a long time, trying to process everything. My family had betrayed me in the worst way, and I couldn't go back. I wouldn't go back. The next morning, I gathered all the evidence Sarah had uncovered and contacted a lawyer. If my parents and Daniel thought they could get away with this, they were wrong. I was done being used, and it was time for them to face the consequences. They would all be punished. If you like this story, subscribe right away and listen to new stories every day. Let us know what you like the most in the comments.